Why am I wearing a backpack? This backpack has been a lot of travels with me. One travel in particular, it has been on, was when I went to, it's very heavy, Frankfurt. And when I arrived at Frankfurt, it was late in the evening, and I was planning on going to a hostel. I was going to find a youth hostel. I was traveling. That was the way you do it when you don't have very much money. And I was 19, and this was getting quite close to 10 o'clock in the evening. And this is when I discovered that there was a massive river festival on, and all of the hotels and hostels were booked up for miles around. Now, this was a number of years ago, so this was my phone at the time. Managed to find that back in the day, I know. If there's anyone Gen Z, this is genuinely what we used to use. I know, I found it specifically for this talk. So I couldn't look up anything on my phone. It had basic internet, but we didn't have 3G, 5G back then. So that wasn't very useful. So I went to some strange thing called an internet cafe. I know, it's bizarre, an internet cafe. And I got in there. There was about 10 minutes before they closed. I had to buy the full hour, which I was a bit annoyed about. And that is when I discovered that the only hotel that had any space at all was 5 kilometers away, and it closed in an hour and a half. And so I had to get 5 kilometers with this, my rucksack as well, all the way across the city to just find somewhere to stay. And that's kind of close to the story that we're looking at this morning. And what we're going to be talking about is let every heart prepare him room, which is one of the verses that we have in the hymn series Joy to the World that we've been doing. And there was no room for me there. But I was a 19-year-old that had done a lot of traveling, and I was a lot fitter back then than I am now. So it wasn't actually that hard for me. I could go, I could find, I had the resources I needed, and I could get somewhere to stay. Mary and Joseph had to travel for probably about 4 days. Mary was heavily pregnant. In fact, actually, my sister this morning, I've just been told, has gone into hospital, and potentially baby number 3 is on the way, which is exciting. And that is about how pregnant Mary was. And I can promise you, my sister does not want to walk for 4 days at 9 months pregnant. The ladies in the room who have been through the experience of carrying a child for 9 months can tell you. I personally don't have that experience, but it's a lot. And so there was no room at the inn for me, but there was no room at the inn for Jesus. But 2,000 years later, are we actually still not leaving room for Jesus? And that's what I want you to consider as we go into our first verse this morning, which is Luke 2, verses 1 to 7. Not chapters, that would be a lot. So, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, to the town of David, which would have taken at least 4 days to walk. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. And she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no guest room available for them. So our topic this morning is, let every heart prepare him room. But what does that really mean? How can we take the true meaning of Christmas and understand how we can apply the truth of the Nativity to our own lives? And I think it's best to start actually with why we would want to do that. And just as I'm speaking, I just ask God to speak to your heart and show you what might be there, that what might be in place of Jesus. Luke 6 tells us that a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart. And an evil man brings evil things out of evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks of what the heart is full of. And so that's where we ask ourselves the question, what actually is in our hearts this morning? And a step further than that, what might be needed to clear the space there so that actually we can have Jesus in the center of our hearts, we can invite the Spirit in. And if you read the Bible a lot, we see that there are a number of idols. And we tend to associate them with things like the golden statue that the Israelites made to Baal. But that's not the only thing that is an idol. An idol really is anything that you place above Jesus, above God, in importance in your life. Anything that takes precedence, anything that we spend and dedicate so much of our time to ahead of God. Jesus actually took this issue really seriously, and one of the most difficult verses to understand and to get to grips with actually teaches us how seriously Jesus took this topic. And we're going to look at why that is, but with Luke 14, verses 25 to 27. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." And if that doesn't feel challenging this morning, then I'm not sure you've understood or you've heard the verse. There's nothing that we cannot be prepared to sacrifice if we want to be followers of Jesus. And that is a very heavy cost to pay. So what does it look like when we're not paying that cost, when we have other things that are in the way? And what might it look like if we were putting God first? I can't put it any better than the way that it's said in Galatians. And Galatians 5 talks about walking in the Spirit and not in the flesh. And it says, "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with one another, so that you are not to do whatever you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law." The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissension, factions, envy, drunkenness, and orgies. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking envy in one another. It's the fruits of the Spirit. It's not the fruits of our own striving. It's not our own actions. So if what I've said so far this morning is feeling burdensome, remember that Jesus says that his burden is light. It's not for us to do. You have to let the Spirit in to do the work in your life and show you where these things are. We can't rely on our own strength. We will fail. So that's one of the models that the Bible gives us for what our lives can look like if we clear out the things that are taking precedence over God in our lives. And I've used a lot of Bible verses this morning, and that's because I literally can't say it better than it says in the Word. And one of the things to do if you want to have a Spirit-filled life is to go to the Bible, to go to what the Word says. And I encourage you now just to think about what are some of the things in your life that might be taking the place of God, that you might be giving precedence to. And think about that as we dwell on this next verse, which is Matthew 6, which says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So what are some of the things that might be in our hearts? You will know this morning some things potentially coming up or coming to the front of your mind already. And before I go into the list of topics I've prepared to help us think this through, it's impossible to do that without humility and without also saying that don't listen to me this morning as a voice that's judging and saying this is what you should do. Know that I'm someone that's on this journey. And the reason that the list we're going to look through is well known to me is because these are all things that I've struggled with. One of the topics is health. And if I turn sideways, it becomes obvious that that might be something that I struggle with more than some others here. And there are many things that are actually deep in our hearts that people don't see, that we struggle with in secret. And I encourage you to take that to God. And if there's something that really hits you as we're going through these examples this morning, God can say so much more than I can. So, what are some of the idols that might be in our life? Now, I didn't bring the bag in just for the Frankfurt story. I want you to imagine, if you will, that this is a heart, this is your heart, or this is my heart. And if this works, it will go well. If it doesn't, we'll see. But what are some of the things that might be in our heart this morning? It is. The transplant did not go well. So what are some of the things that might be in our heart? Now, this is a little model that I have. We'll see what he does this morning. We have... There we go. I made my dad get me that for Christmas one year. So, obviously the first topic is drinking and partying. And the verse that speaks to this is Ephesians 5:18, which is, "Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit." How many times have you said, or you heard someone said, "It's not my fault I was drunk"? A few groans in the congregation this morning. But that actually isn't true. We're responsible for the state that we put ourselves in. We're responsible for the environments that we put ourselves in, or even knowing we are in an environment of temptation, being aware and not letting ourselves go down that track. And in fact, it's something that you can get really stuck in. And so you may not have an issue with drinking, but I think most people will at least be close to someone that really has had a problem with drinking in their life. And as a church, we shouldn't just look to our own hearts, but also help one another with the things that we're struggling with. Be accountable with one another. Come alongside one another, because it is so much better to struggle and deal with these things in community. So the next thing is very special to me because it came from my niece. And this is a thank you card that I got after I got her a unicorn headband for her 4th birthday, which was a few weeks ago. And she says, "Dear Uncle Mitchell, thank you very much for my unicorn things. I love them very much. Lots of love, Elizabeth." So that there is something that is in my heart. And if we go to the next slide, some of the things that can be in our heart are really good things. I love my family, and that's a good thing. But I have to be prepared to sacrifice that. And I'll go back to the verse that we looked at earlier. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. That is hard. You know, in the Christian world, we often put marriage up on a pedestal, which is why I've used the image of a couple there. And that's something that is really deep in our hearts. And actually, I'm guilty of, with some of my friends saying, if marriage isn't in my future, I'm not sure it's a future that I want. And I know that there are people here, there are people listening for whom that is a reality as well. And it's a hard thing to give over to God. But your life can be so much more fulfilled when it's Spirit-led. And that's what came behind this next verse. 1 John 4:19-21. We love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or sister, is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister, whom they have seen, cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must love their brother and sister. Now that might seem in contradiction with the first verse, but it isn't. You see, what Luke is telling us in chapter 14 is that the degree to which we give God precedence in our life, in our heart, needs to be so great that it is as if all other things are worthless to us. And when we do have God in our hearts, think about what flows from us, what the gifts of the Spirit were. And it's then from that God-given love that we can love our family genuinely, rather than taking and perhaps looking at a wife lustfully, or using your family only as a support network for when things are difficult, but actually to love generously with gentleness and with kindness. And that's why it's so important to have God first in our hearts. Really hope nothing's broken, because okay. Now, this next one might be a bit confusing. It is a Yankee Candle, black cherry. And it does smell very nice. And the reason I've used this is because it's the only thing I could think of that was appropriate. Because the next topic is sex. But it's not just sex, it's sexuality and it's porn. Now, the verse I've gone with is, flee also youthful lusts, but pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace. Now, I could have taken any verse from Proverbs, which is essentially Solomon writing, saying, you know the street that the prostitute lives on? Don't even go near the street, go the long way around. That is so much of Proverbs, is him saying, avoid what mistakes I have made in my life, because he had something like 400 concubines. And if you think about recent history, how many leaders in the church have fallen because they failed in this? Sex and lust have become more important than God, and it's often something that we hide. In fact, it's very likely that people in our church, people in this room, people looking, watching online at home, have failed in this within at least the last week. And it's something that I've struggled with in my life as well. And I can tell you, it is so hard to do on your own. Don't take pride and not let people know that it's something you're struggling with. Let other people come alongside you, have an accountability partner, have people that will help you. Because when we fail in our sex lives, it can lead to so many other problems. And today, so much of our identity is tied up in our sexuality, in how much sex we might be having or not at all. There's people that even identify themselves today with the fact that they're celibate, but it's not their own choice. It's not meant to be the core of our identity. So I encourage you, let this be an area that you let God in. Now, this next one might be familiar. Oh. Yes, the lovely Liberty Church branded coffee cup. Why coffee cup? Well, really this one is health and it's food. But one of the things that we take into our bodies more often than anything else is probably coffee. So that was why I went with the cup. But it's not just the cup that I want us to think of. The verse that I've gone with is 1 Corinthians 10:31. It says, therefore, whatever you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all things to the glory of God. And that means looking after our health, and that is a daily decision. Many of the things that I'm talking about this morning are a daily decision to get right. And it's not just what is the food that we put into our bodies. It's drug use. It's mental health. Do we actually spend the time to actually manage our health in a way that means that we can serve, that we can put God first? It's so easy to get caught up in self-pity or in wallowing and not let God come and actually deal with some of the things that are in our heart. And not seeking medical attention when it's needed. And also in the things that we choose to consume on a daily basis. There's a lot that we do that is unhealthy. So think about what you're putting in to your body, but also the way that you're using it. But don't go too far. This is the tricky one. It's not a towel. A towel. This is the preparation for what is really coming out, which sounds tense, but it isn't. Right. Actually, might need to get ready for this one. Thank you. Now these is my weight set that hopefully you can tell I use. But it's heavy. And we can get completely obsessed. Put it down. This is why the towel is here. That worked, it worked. Right, so we can become completely obsessed with our appearance. We can become completely obsessed with how we look. And actually, we really worship ourselves. And we do that even if we think we look good, or if we think we don't look good. If our appearance and the way that we view ourselves gets in the way of our time with God, or our time serving others, then it's maybe in the wrong place. I've taken a verse from Proverbs 31, which is actually a mother saying how to choose a wife, and it's advice to a son. It says, "Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised." And that's something that only you can answer yourself as well. Is that something that you put first in your life? Do you fear the Lord, or are you more concerned with what other people think of you? So, the next one. Gets a lot thinner in here. Some of you might recognize what this is. It is in fact a phone stand. And you'll see there that it should hold my phone. It does. So, entertainment is the next thing that we can put in our hearts. And it's sort of known, I think, by everyone here that we spend a lot of time using technology. How much time do you spend every week scrolling on your phone? I personally spend far too much time on Instagram, on TikTok, on all these things that can distract us. And again, I'm not saying that these are necessarily bad things. But do you use technology or entertainment to comfort you before you go to God with a problem? Because that is so often what we do in our lives. We find numbing agents that deal with the pain that we're coping with. And we actually hold on to things for far longer than we need to because we won't go to God first. So, why do we put God first in our lives? Because he can actually genuinely comfort us. He doesn't just numb things, he deals with things. And if you let the Spirit in and spend the time to work out what the root is rather than being distracted, then it can transform your life. But to take that one step deeper, I've taken a verse from Romans. It's Romans 15:1. It says, "We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves." Now, this actually is a topic that is addressing a problem that they had in the early church, which was that they had Christians of strong faith who really knew what they were free of, and they had other younger Christians who were still bound by a lot of the laws and traditions that they had. Now, the best analogy I could think of for a story for this was actually when I was on a YWAM base. And on the YWAM base, the entire base was teetotal. So there was no wine anywhere on the base. And it wasn't because theologically they thought you shouldn't drink wine. It was because we had people on the base that were coming with a lot of struggles and a lot of difficulties and some of those were with alcohol. And so in order for that to be a place that people could effectively heal, the entire community gave something up so that they had that space to do it. And so what that verse is saying is you need to be prepared to give up things, even good things, that you have no problem with for the sake of others. And not to please ourselves. And if we put God first, then automatically we will start putting other people first and consider what our actions have as consequences. Now, this next one, I'm going to pull out. It's going to take some time. It's a tie. So, why have I chosen a tie? One of the things that we spend a lot of time on and we can become obsessed over is our career. And I like the nods, thank you. In fact, it's often one of the first things we will ask about someone. What did you do? It's so important and integral to our identity. And it's important. I mean, for example, this church only runs because people have jobs and careers and are generous enough to give of what they earn so that we can meet in a community. We often end up spending so much of our free time thinking about our jobs and talking about our jobs that it can become a source of pride. And that's so prevalent in society that we've got a phrase that talks about it, which is, do you live to work or do you work to live? And I would actually use that phrase and take that phrase and put it differently and say, are you working so that you can prioritize what God wants you to do with your life? Which fits around the other? I'm a little bit pressed for time, so I'll move through these a little bit faster. The next one is something that causes a lot of division. And I've got my passport. It's a very recent passport. You can tell that it's recent because it's blue. And for those of you who know about the controversy of why this passport is blue, will know that that has been a subject of great tension. If you could cast your mind back to before the pandemic, the only thing that was on the news was Brexit. And we used to have red passports, and then we left the EU, and now we have blue passports. And this was a topic that divided everyone. And even in the church, people said some really nasty things to one another because of difference in belief and in politics. And that's not how God asks us to be with one another. He says in 1 Peter 2, verses 13 to 17, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor. That means put unity first. If we come to this place with a heart of division, we will fall apart. But if we have God first, we won't speak out hatefully. And actually we can have differences of opinion and still be unified. Now, this last one is so important that we carry it on ourselves at all times. And that is money. And the Bible is actually really clear about money. It speaks a lot about money. There were a lot of verses that I could have chosen to use. Matthew 6 says this: "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Money is important. It is needed to live. But it's not more important than God. And a challenge that you can use to know whether money takes up too much of a place in your heart is, can you give freely? If God said today, I want you to sell everything, give everything, how easy would that be? Or would you spend a long, long time checking that that's really what God is saying? I certainly know that's what I would do. But there's another side of that we tend not to think of, because we can also put too much in money when we don't have much, when we are struggling. Can you fully trust that God will provide for you? Or do we trust in institutions? Do we trust in our job? Or do we take our finances to God? Because that's another way that we can put trust in money over trust in God. And you cannot serve both. So, I have one more thing, you'll be pleased to hear, in this bag. And it might not be something that I've said already. But what I want everyone to do is think back over everything we've discussed. There's something that's in your heart this morning. And I don't know what it is. And it needs you to speak to God and ask him what it is. So I'm just going to leave this here. And you can put in your mind whatever it is that God is speaking to you about right now. What is in your heart in place of God? If you remember, we looked at what comes out of your heart. If it's good, if it's evil, is what's stored up there. And Mark 10:18 tells us something really important. It is that no one is good except God alone. If you want the gifts of the Spirit, if you want the fruit of the Spirit, that's a verse to grab hold of. No one is good but God alone. There's a couple of other things to talk through, but I just wanted to take the time to pray, because I know that some of this has been heavy this morning and has been challenging. And so, Spirit, Holy Spirit, I just invite you into each one of our lives, into each one of our hearts this morning, that you would show us what there is. You would tell us what it is that we have in place of you, so that we could remove those things and make room for you. Remember the question I started with? 2,000 years later, we still have problem finding space for Jesus. And I remember when I was a child, one of the really amazing family rituals that we had was in the morning, usually on a Sunday, sometimes on a Saturday. My sister and I would run into my parents' bedroom, and usually my dad would then read the whole family a story. And one of the stories that has really stuck with me was the story of the pearl. And it's a parable that Jesus tells in Matthew. And it's of a rich man, And it says that the pearl is like a kingdom, the kingdom of heaven. And the rich man finds this pearl in the market. And when he finds it, realizes its value, he gets so excited. And he rushes home. He sells everything he has so that he can buy that pearl. And the parable is teaching us that that is what the kingdom of God is like. And I encourage you this morning that that could be something that we aim for. But I don't think anyone but Jesus has actually truly got there. But we can, as a community, move forward in that way. So I want to end with how. What does it look like to prepare room in our heart for Jesus? The first is confession. Get the bad out. Turn away from the things that we're doing that lead us into sin. The places where we put something else. Could be one of the things that we've talked about this morning first. And the second is time spent with the Bible, with the Word, time spent in prayer, thanking God, asking God for things, listening to Him, so that you can actually be filled by the Spirit on a daily basis. And then there's the need to maintain that in our lives. And that means daily choosing to deny yourself and put God first. Because it matters what's in your heart. It will come out. Whenever we get stressed or angry, it's a spilling over of what's in our heart. And when we make room for Jesus so that He is what takes up our heart, all these things that are good will flow out instead. We won't be quick to be angry, but we would be patient. And it's about taking Jesus and giving time. And the thing that I had to represent that this morning was, it's quite fun. So it's like a Where's Waldo book or Where's Wally? And you have to find Jesus. And I liked that as an analogy to end on. That it's Jesus that we need to place in the center of our hearts. And Ephesians 2:4-5 says this. But because of His great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ. Even when we were dead in transgressions, it is by grace that you have been saved. So I ask you to consider this last question in your own life. Will you make room for Jesus? Will you let the Spirit lead you in putting God first and letting Him be Lord?